My guest today is Chasten. He's a teacher and a speaker and an advocate. He's also the author of a New York Times bestselling book called I Have Something to Tell You. I first connected with Chasten after I interviewed his husband, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. I was eager to have this conversation as an example of rupture and repair, which is a 4-part series that we're running right now, as a way to remind a country hungry for informed hope that there is a go-to set of principles and practices that might help all of us find repair after rupture. Here's my conversation with Chasten Buttigieg. I thought maybe we would go back in time to rural Michigan with your Catholic family and tell us the story of coming to understand clearly that you were gay and then helping your family understand who you were and how different people in your family circle handled that shift in their understanding of your sort of core identity.
That's a long journey.
Yeah.
I did not know that being gay was a thing. So to come into my identity was to first start to recognize that something about me was what I felt off, was different, but those feelings I had no name for. So for many of those first years, I think it must have been somewhere around 5th grade, I started to feel different and recognize that I was obviously gay, but I didn't have the words for it. And it really wasn't until high school that I was starting to recognize that this could be the thing that really prevents me from, one, either living an authentic life and being alive, and two, losing my family. I lived so many years not understanding who I was or what these feelings meant, deep in the closet, fearful that I'd lose my family. And then I ran away to Germany my senior year of high school on an exchange program, which really was the first time that I'd found the language for it. But, my upbringing here in Northern Michigan was sort of pure Americana. I mean, I was running around in the backyard and my dad was taking us on fishing trips and we would camp underneath the stars and we would sell Christmas trees in the winter as a family. I mean, a really beautiful upbringing, but we just never acknowledged the existence of gay people.
The other thing about your upbringing that I feel we must mention is that you're a champion pit spitter.
Yeah, I mean, Traverse City's home to the National Cherry Festival. We're the cherry capital of the world. And so childhood was cherry pit spit contests and riding on my grandpa's tractor through his cherry orchard, I was a 4-H kid. I was raising goats from a young age and then dairy feeders and steers in high school. But all the while thinking I had to be one type of kid. Very religious family, conservative setting.
Did it mess with every day of your life from 5th grade on? Or were there whole periods where you could convince yourself that you were going to be on the same road as everybody else you knew?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day knowing that something about you was different. And if anyone were to find out that secret, that it could potentially ruin everything.
Did you feel suicidal?
All the time. Yeah. Oftentimes feeling like that would have been the easiest route for me, but also the easiest route for my family. Many of my fears weren't necessarily that I would be abused or that my dad would say, no son of mine's gay, get out of my house, I never want to see you again. I was also really fearful that I would be such an embarrassment to them. My parents are well known in the community, big small business. I was so fearful that if anyone found out that Sherry and Terry's kid was gay, that it would be more embarrassing to them, that they would lose their friends, that they would lose family members, that they would be ostracized, kicked out of their church. And it would be worse to inflict that kind of pain on them than to no longer be here.
How did you find your way out of that moment, of that repeated moment, it sounds like?
In a way, I think I'm still finding my way out of it. I think when you live 18 years of your life, I'm about to turn 35, that's the majority of your life. When you live 18 years of your life thinking that something about you was wrong or twisted or broken, you have to spend, at least once you're able to come out of the closet or start to see the sun, you have to spend a lot of time picking apart the pieces of yourself that you created. You have to figure out what parts of you are real and what parts of you just made up to protect yourself from the world around you. And in a way, I feel like I'm still figuring that out. But it was that year in Germany where I made friends who made me feel safe enough to come out. And when I came out, it wasn't a thing at all. To have someone affirm you and to love you for who you are, that's what gave me the courage to keep going. And then when I went back home, enough courage to eventually come out, because I felt like I at least had seen a glimmer of hope. And I wanted to know what that was like. I wanted to know what it was like to be loved, to find love, to fall in love. Of course, at that time, it wasn't possible to get married or have a family, but I'd always had those dreams, and I was curious to see if any of them would come true.
Do you think there was a part of you that knew that a context change could create a road, meaning leaving your town and going to Germany might produce the conditions that would allow you to let the bubble all the way up and out?
I think that was my hope for Germany. I mean, I'd studied German for 4 years in high school and was a pretty good student, but the idea of Germany was, this is my ticket out of this town. And the only way to even see if you can survive in this world is to get out of this town. And so applying for the scholarship was not academic based. I wanted to go to the other side of the world, and I wanted to see if I could survive and if I could survive myself.
Who was the person you were most afraid to tell?
My mom. My mom at first, and then my grandma. I was definitely a mama's boy, and I knew my mom loved me. But when you think that love is conditional, that you will only be loved if you're the good Christian boy, if you're the good, conservative cowboy, if you promise a wife and, 2.5 kids in the minivan and the white picket fence, then you will receive mom's love. But if you were anything outside of the norm, at least that's what I thought. It's not as if my mom ever told me that. That was just expected.
How did it go?
Awful. I had come out to some friends and had told them I can't take this anymore. And I just need to, pull off the Band-Aid, so to speak. And I didn't have the courage to tell my mom, so I wrote her a letter. And I had talked to a friend about coming and sleeping on her couch for a while. And I went home and I packed some bags. And my mom was folding laundry. A nice sunny summer day. Windows were open, curtains were blowing in the wind. Mom was sitting in the recliner. And I just handed her the letter and said, I'm sorry. The rest is a little fuzzy. Didn't even have the guts to tell my dad. Yeah.
It's kind of a mean way of talking to yourself. Didn't have the guts. I didn't even have the courage to say it out loud. Like, whatever, you found your way to communicate it to them. I don't want you being mean to my new friend.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's part of the constant work, right? When you look back on yourself and wish that you could have done something different. I was working within what I had and what I knew. And you're right. I should be much kinder to that younger kid.
Yeah.
At that time, I could never have gone. I knew my dad was in his garage, in his workshop. And I couldn't even walk through that door. I had to go out a different door.
So your heart's pounding. Your mom has this information. How long until you heard from her?
5 minutes. she called me as I was driving away and asked why I was leaving. And I just kept saying, I'm sorry. And she asked if I was sure. I know there was this moment on the couch where she opened the letter and immediately started crying. And I want to give my mom a lot of grace because this was a different time and my mom is our biggest ally and she loves her grandkids and we have such a fantastic relationship. So I just want to preface all these stories with that. I remember her asking if I was sick, and I think my mom might have thought that I had AIDS.
Oh.
And we just didn't know then, right? None of us had the language to say what we wanted to say. And there was so much room for growth there, and I'm so grateful that it happened because not everybody gets that. And now looking back, I understand that what my mom was trying to do was find a way to connect with me, find a way to work through this together. But I was, young and scared and naive and had already made up my mind. My family will hate me. I'm going to lose my family. I'm an embarrassment. I have to run. That I don't think I was even receptive to her putting out feelers for some sort of connection or understanding. So yeah, she called me 5 minutes after I left and asked if I was sure, and I was just so embarrassed.
When was the next time you saw her in person?
A couple months. I was going to the community college and working at the hospital. There might have been times where I would see her at the grocery store or the hospital. We both worked at the hospital. I don't remember those times. But the significant connection came a couple months later when I think she had sort of heard that I was, sleeping on friends' couches and I would occasionally sleep in my car. And she just said, come home and we'll figure it out. And I drove right home.
That's what you were waiting for.
Yeah.
Come home.
I think so much of that hurt can be avoided if our parents just sit us down when we're young and tell us that we will be loved unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
We just unfortunately didn't have that conversation when I was younger. We never really talked about gay people. And the only things I ever heard about gay people were obviously in the pejorative, the insults and the put downs in the locker room, in the hallways. But had we just talked about it, I would have never had to live with all of that fear. I would have never had to run away from home. And it wasn't until I got to come back home that my mom told me that she would love me unconditionally, no matter who I was.
You sold her short.
Yeah.
You didn't think she had it in her. Or maybe you were just so afraid that she didn't have it in her.
Probably both. My mom is such an incredible woman. She's loud and she's funny and she's the life of the party. And she was like that mom at sporting events. She always brought a cooler for everybody and like a candy bag. And she was everyone's biggest cheerleader. And the thing about being her son was like, how do you break this woman's heart? The woman that everybody loves. How do you embarrass her?
You were so sure that it would break her heart.
So sure.
But you weren't right.
Because you just weren't gay in Northern Michigan.
Right.
And
what would it have been comparable to? Like for people who are younger listening to this, who are like, what is he talking about? Like, it's so much has changed in the last 17 years since this moment.
I don't it was such a taboo. And it was synonymous with being filthy and shameful. And that was the thing that I was so embarrassed of, was that I would now be seen as something disgusting and dirty. Pairing that with someone like my mom, I would play these scenarios around in my head like mom going back into the hockey arena or the football field and her friends not looking at her, not talking at her. Her son's a faggot. Can you believe it? Whispering to one another, shaming her for something that they would have said was her fault, which is something that my grandma and I talked about when I came out to my grandma. I loved my grandma. I adored my grandma. And just these things that, the people that we love say, I had finally worked up the courage to come out to grandma. Everyone told me not to tell grandma. She was the last person. Everyone said, don't tell grandma, it'll kill her, which is not something that I needed to hear. But I loved her so much, and I felt like I wanted her to know this thing about me, which, sidebar, then it felt like you had to go on an apology tour, a coming out tour, right? Come out to everyone, apologize, or explain who you are, validate your humanity, which is so bogus. Nobody needs to come out to anybody if they don't want to. But I finally worked up the courage to tell her, I think it was Thanksgiving, and we made our way outside. We sat in the front seat of her car, and I couldn't even find the words. I just said, Grandma, and broke down in tears. And she reached over and grabbed my hand with all of her big, chunky gold rings digging into my knuckles, squeezed me so tight and said, I know Chasters was my nickname. And she said, I love you just the same. And then there were lots of tears and me trying to qualify this existence and maybe a mistake I had made or something was off about me. Or my grandma, God love her, said, it's your mother's fault. She said, because I have two older brothers, and she said, when your mom was pregnant with you, she kept worrying that she was going to have another boy. And I said, Sherry, if you keep worrying so much, that baby's going to come out half boy, half girl.
Oh my God, my mouth is wide open right now.
It's like, I don't know if that was very helpful, but I think that was her way of finding humor in it. That you're just who you are. And it's because your mom worried so much. Obviously wasn't the easiest thing to hear. And I know Grandma was trying to find humor, but that's just kind of where people's heads were then. None of us had the language for this, to navigate this.
Coming up next, Chasten talks about balancing his desire to protect his peace with his goal of bridging differences through storytelling. We'll be right back with Kelly Corrigan Wonders. Let's jump back to my conversation with teacher, author, advocate, Chasten Buttigieg. Was there anyone whose reaction just tortured you?
Oh, yeah. Good friend from high school. Called them, and again, on the apology tour, just going through everybody in the phone book.
So exhausting for such a young person.
Awful.
And yeah.
And I just said, I want you to know this about me, and I'm gay, and I will never forget her saying, I love you, but that's not what God wants for you. That was the last time we spoke. And those words still sting to this day, because you experience this when you're touring the country and you're sitting down with young people who hear the exact same thing. I love you, but it's a sin. I love you, but it's not what God wants for you. I love you, but I don't support that lifestyle, is saying, I love you, but you're not an equal.
Yeah, and it's not really, it doesn't really comport with my definition of love.
Oh, absolutely not.
That's not.
I got that from quite a few people.
And how do you process that? Like how, I'm thinking about your individual story, and then I'm thinking about the country, sort of writ large, this, it's settled law, gay marriage.
Yeah.
But it's not settled culture. And I wonder what you would want people to understand. Like, what would you say if you could have the pulpit and explain to people who feel that you are wrong, that to be gay is to be wrong? What would you say? How would you persuade them? What have you learned in terms of all your advocacy work that has worked in terms of communication and stepping through the information and emotions with people such that they might evolve in their thinking?
I always rely on storytelling when I share my mother's story, our family's story, that all of this love is just like your love. You know, a loving son, a grandson, a father, a very active community member who wants many of the same things that sometimes I think people on the furthest end of the opposite political spectrum want. Safe community for my kid, better playgrounds, pay our teachers more, access to affordable healthcare. You know, all I want to do is sit and drink my coffee and watch my kids run around the playground and laugh too. I guess in this hypothetical, the first part of me in the hypothetical wouldn't even go to the pulpit because I'm trying to protect my peace.
Really?
That sometimes, I think if someone were to say, explain why you're not wrong, I would say, no, thank you. I have other things to do today. But in the hypothetical sense of trying to move the needle, I always tell people to not pick up I know sometimes you want to beat people over the head with a 2x4, but I like to lay the 2x4 down and build a bridge. And hopefully, slowly, we get people to the right side of history. And the way I do that work is by being a good husband, being a good dad, being a good teacher. And in many ways, I think the things that our family wants are the same things that all the other families want. And I think we can find common connection in that wanting to be accepted and loved for who we are. But I also try to square these conversations with the fact that public opinion's there now. The majority of Americans support LGBTQ equality. The majority of Americans support marriage equality, which was not the case growing up. I don't think I would have believed you had you said on your 35th birthday, your 3-year-olds will be wreaking havoc in your kitchen, right? And you'll be telling your husband to help clean up the mess on the floor because you have to record a podcast upstairs in the home that you shared together, right? I don't think I would have believed you that all of those dreams would have come true so fast.
Yeah, it really is one of the greatest cases of progress in our lifetime. I mean, it is such a hopeful story. From the day that you were born to the day that you are living right now. It's not that long. You're just a young pup. And look how much has changed.
Yeah.
And yet, there's still some people on the other side of this with whom we need to repair, with whom we need to build a future where the public opinion crosses all the way over.
I believe that sometimes we see the worst of it online and on television because I think so much of politics and television and social media these days is just theater.
Yes, totally.
Sometimes I will meet, I'll be at a gas station and some guy in a flannel and a trucker cap will come up to me and say, I've seen you on TV before, and I'll tell him who I am. And they'll say something like, that husband of yours, I'm a Republican, but I really like that guy, which you're not going to read online if you open my Twitter app right now, right? You'll just get punched in the face with bigotry and hatred. But I will meet these people in my community and when I'm traveling around the country who call themselves Republicans or call themselves former Republicans, and they're fans.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell me they've read my book, which always blows me out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is reflective of public opinion, that the majority of Republicans I'm actually sitting down and talking with don't even think about our family, our marriage that way. They're usually wanting to talk about something else.
Well, that goes to a principle that has come up for 4 years on this podcast, which is proximity. With a cheers to Brian Stevenson for putting the right word on it so long ago. But, you're interacting face to face with people. And when you're interacting face to face with people, all kinds of things happen. It's like, oh, wow, look, we have the same shoes on. Oh, you like pickleball? I like pickleball. Oh, you got a bad back? Me too. Oh, you just finished watching Succession? Us too. All of a sudden there's just this potential for casual overlaps and intersections that start to minimize this one particular way where you're different, which isn't really that big a deal. I mean, it's kind of like if we divided the world between like people who like baths and people who like showers. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's not so different.
I always think about what some of these people would say if they came to our house. Some of the loudest voices on the right who have been attacking my kids since the day they were born.
Really?
Who had nothing but vitriol to spew when my husband was on paternity leave, especially when our son was connected to a ventilator in a children's hospital at 2 months old, 5 pounds. The theater of it online. If you were to come to my house this morning, right, and see what our morning routine is like here, your kid jumping in your bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, elbowing you to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning, bleary-eyed, tried to make a cup of coffee, make some pancakes and some scrambled eggs. It's muggy here today, so we're getting the water table out very early, singing songs as we run around with the dog. We're just a family doing things that every other family's doing, trying to muster that energy to make it to 10 a.m. or your second cup of coffee and do your best and do right by your kids. And sometimes I think, just put Twitter down for a second and come over. And I understand that we disagree on many other issues, but come over and I'll pour you a cup of coffee. And you can see that we're doing many of the same things that you're doing and that we want many of the same things that you want. And that this house is so full of love that I'm almost jealous of it to think of some of the things that I could have had as a kid that we just didn't have the language or the understanding. These kids are so loved and safe that I think we could find a lot more common ground if we just got off Twitter and sat down with one another and talked about our kids. That's why I like being out of Washington and being back in northern Michigan. We live in a pretty purple county. This county, I don't believe, has gone blue, but it's pretty close. And we're situated between many other homes with, Biden flag, Trump flag, Biden flag, Trump flag. It's your quintessential purple district. And when our kids were born, I tell this story everywhere I go about finding common ground with our neighbors and how we can overcome our differences. When our kids were born, we brought them here to northern Michigan for a couple months. And a journalist or a photographer, I don't know if you could call them a journalist, showed up at one of our neighbors' houses. And the photographer had expressed that the Buttigiegs just adopted 2 kids and they could be the first person to get a picture of them. And from what I understand, because this was told to me secondhand, because this neighbor knows a family member, small town, she told that photographer where he could shove it and to get off her front porch. I believe we're on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they went to find my family member and tell them what had happened and to let them know that they were looking out for us because they knew that protecting those kids was the most important thing to us. That we can put politics aside and recognize that sometimes a family just wants to be a family and they can be left alone. That's neighbor looking out for neighbor. I don't know some of my other neighbors' politics. We don't talk about politics. We swap blueberries and cherries, and we have some pretty good fishing near our house, so we swap bluegill fillets. It's the most lovely thing. We don't talk politics. We just share the harvest.
Just neighbor up.
We're just neighbors.
Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe a tactic of rupture and repair, like maybe a repair concept that is transferable, is to put children in the center of the frame for a second. It's so easy, I feel, when we're thinking about the children, American children, to find our areas of utter, passionate agreement. And then somehow we get less tolerant as people become older. But there is something clarifying about looking at the country through the lens of how hard or easy it is to grow up here and flourish. There's something about that might draw us together for a minute as we look at all the ways that we're split apart.
I hope so. I hope that caring for and defending American children sort of becomes the next infrastructure. Like we all said, infrastructure was the big bipartisan issue. I hope it can become. So we all want our teachers to be paid well. We all want quality, affordable early childhood education. Every parent deserves paid parental leave. And I hope we can all get on that same page. That let's give parents the help they need and teachers the help they need. And why shouldn't America be leading the world in public education? Maybe we can get there. I'm hopeful because you're right. When we sit down and we just talk about our kids and our hopes for our kids. I mean, every parent has been to the playground where you're trying to figure out what to talk to the other parent about, right? After you've gone beyond like names and where you bought their shoes and, we all have these shared experiences in parenting one way or the other. And most of them come, center around needing help, that we all lean on our support systems and our teachers.
How well do you feel like you could articulate the anti-LGBTQ position?
I honestly don't know what it is. So when I'm talking to folks about it around the country, I just keep reminding them that it's theater. It's Anita Bryant all over again. They're coming for our kids. Be fearful of the gays because they just need a boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to center my political action and my public work around what I'm for and my hopes and my dreams for this country, what we're building, not what we're against.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the anti-LGBTQ movement right now is just centered on, obviously, lies and fear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Don't Say Gay in Florida was, such a waste of time. That somehow, a child could be hurt by a teacher just acknowledging that they're, I could say, oh, my husband and I took the kids to the zoo this weekend. What did you do? Or pulling books off the shelf. I mean, it's such a well-coordinated and funded campaign because it works for their base. But as we've seen, the majority of Americans reject it. And I just think so much of it is bad theater. I mean, I went to theater school, and so it's just shameful, The whole point of politics is that we elect people to go to those big white buildings in Washington to make our lives better and safer, right? And the whole point of electing someone is that you don't have to do it, right? But now we're also dialed in on politics because Washington has just become a show. It's like a content farm. Like, what wild thing did this person say this day? And who did they insult? And congressional hearings become, late night TV fodder. And unfortunately,
it's definitely reality TV at its worst.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the big scapegoats right now is the LGBTQ community, especially young, vulnerable trans kids. I mean, some of these states have spent millions upon millions of dollars to prevent one kid who petitioned the state athletic association to play on a team. That's theater.
I wonder what it is. I just keep wondering, what is it? What is underneath all that? Is it that you think that if there's one, there's going to be 1,000? Like, is it a slippery slope thing where it's like, or is it my kid's a swimmer and if you put that kid in the pool, my kid's going to lose? Like, is it a scarcity argument? So it's slippery slope is one possibility. Scarcity is another, which is the pie's not big enough already. And there's just no way that X kind of person can have in on this stuff. I mean, fill in the blank. It could be immigrant. It could be gay person. It could be that.
Well, think about the stories we were just talking about with young Chasten and young parents. We just didn't
Chasters.
know. Yeah. We can grow and learn and evolve, become better people, or we can choose not to. We can put our blinders on and say, I don't want to. And I think that's what we experience right now. Me Too movement, Black Rights movement, right? Black Lives Matter. People put on their blinders and say, I don't want to read that book. I don't want to learn about that person's struggle. I'm comfortable where I'm at.
Yeah, maybe it's like an anti-change feeling. Like
I
it's
think
like I
so.
don't want to be changed. I know where my lines are. I know how I perceive the world to be, and I'm not
Yes.
open to start redrawing everything. It's too endless. I mean, we could be, like you every now and then you hear the crazy talk show guy be like, "What, are you going to let people marry dogs?" And you're like, "Oh, so that's your fear, is that it's just
Yeah.
we're never going to close up the circle. We're never going to say, this is it. This is how it is. This is the world. These are the people in it. It's done.
Yeah.
We understand
Right.
it."
And I think many gay people, many queer people have had that conversation with someone where they say, well, I love you, but I think you're spot on. I think some people just don't want to recognize that maybe the world always has been different around them. And that
Right.
it's slowly changing and they're no longer in the norm. But that's the thing. I don't want to replace the norm. I just want to keep my kids safe.
Right.
When I'm in the
Right.
hospital, I want to make sure that my husband can come sit by my bedside or sit at our kids' bedside. I want to keep my
Right.
family safe, and I just want to be a good member of the community and do my job. I'm not looking to change anything.
Right.
I'm
I'm
just
not
looking
looking
to
to sell
exist
anybody.
equally.
Right. Tell me a great story of repair in your personal life where you thought
Mm.
something would never get glued back together and somehow it did.
I think the journey with my parents is one that means so much to me. My dad used to take me on these really incredible fishing trips when I was young. We would pack up the car and drive up to the UP and
What's
camp out in
UP?
the middle of the Upper Peninsula
Okay.
of Michigan. And, no electricity, no running water, no Wi-Fi, just camping under the stars. And you could hear the wolves howling at night and just watch the stars from your sleeping bag. And just incredible trips. And I was always so fearful that I would lose this magic with my father. And just 2 weeks ago, I had to drop my kids off at my parents' house because I needed to head to the airport. And I got really emotional watching them in the backyard. My dad has this incredible strawberry patch, and he was out there running around with my kids barefoot in the strawberry patch, and they were picking berries and eating strawberries with their grandpa. And I never thought that I would see that dream come true. To be so loved, to know that your parents love you, that they're proud of you, and to watch them love their grandkids.
Just to be entwined, happily entwined.
Yeah,
Didn't
that's what
have
we
to
all want.
sever everything.
Yeah. My parents chose love. They chose love over fear and the opinions of other people and
Yeah,
prejudice. They
what
put
was
all of
their
that aside.
experience for it in their own, as you said, they were really well known and beloved in your community. What was their process like?
I think it was tough for them in some regard because the thing that I had going for me was that I left. I did community college for 2 years and then I left. And my parents were here. My parents are in the same house they bought when they were 18 years old, freshly married out of high school. They've been
Wow.
here and they're staying here. And I know they've had some falling outs with some friends, religious community, but they have also found other friends in different religious communities. I never thought my mom would hold my hand and walk down Front Street of Traverse City, Michigan in the Up North Pride March wearing a shirt that said Proud Mom.
Mm.
But my mom knows exactly who she is. And if anyone has something else to say, she's going to say something right back. She loves her kid. She loves her grandkids. She knows what she believes in. But in order to get to that place, we all had to grow. And we had to have the hard conversations. And sometimes they asked the right questions and sometimes they asked the wrong questions or embarrassing questions. But we had the talks and we kept coming to the table in good faith because we wanted to make this work. I didn't want
Yeah,
to
and
lose my parents and they didn't want to lose their kid.
that's really to be underlined in terms of repair, is you got to keep coming to the table in good faith. And also, you have to fundamentally believe in the potential of people to grow. And that's what maybe like a teenager just cannot believe, that people who are as old as your parents were in your eyes at that time could do it, could grow into a new worldview. And of course we can. Of course people can grow. Like that's a sort of core worldview for repair, is that growth is always possible.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't believe that, you won't keep coming to the table in good faith.
Yeah.
And nothing happens if you're not at the table.
I think many of us have to continuously weigh whether it's worth coming back to the table. And, eventually, sometimes with some people, you recognize it's not worth coming back. But there have been many relationships repaired and strengthened because we kept coming back to the table.
Mm. Did anybody ever come and apologize to you?
Yeah. Actually, about 2 years ago, moving back to Northern Michigan has allowed me to obviously see friends more often and folks that you might have lost touch with along the way. And I was sitting on a dock with a friend I went to high school with. And we hadn't really talked much in the last, 15 years. We're just catching up on one another's kids and families and what it's like to be living in Northern Michigan again. And they said, I want to apologize. I had no idea what you were going through. And I wish I would have known. I wish I could have done something to help, which meant a lot.
I think that delayed apology is one of the most beautiful notes in the human orchestra. I just love that the idea that somebody's sitting with something and holding it and is not going to let the moment pass twice.
Yeah.
I mean, I love repair. I think repair is like prettiest flower in the bunch.
I think it was beautiful that you could have lived your entire life holding on to that.
Yeah.
Well, now we're sitting on this dock. Now we're, rekindling a friendship. Now we're talking again. So why bring up the past? But there's even the smallest opportunity to put a little super glue on a tiny little crack. Do it.
Yeah. What do you love about your husband? Now that you've been married for a little while and you have kids and you've had to suffer through all that craziness.
How dedicated he is. I'm so grateful. That's not like the cheesy way. It's just, he has a very hard job and being a dad is harder, right? And he switches hats very well. And I really, really appreciate having a dedicated partner like that who recognizes that, being in my position isn't always easy. All of the work shouldn't fall to another parent. But also just dedicated in love. That before I met Peter, I had so many bad relationships and never thought I was going to find true love. And falling in love with him has been such a journey. And to have someone hold you up every day, try to make it a little better every day, who recognizes, even when I don't, that I'm hurting or something is off. Sort of like we were saying, finding little ways to help. And love is beautiful. I love love, but partnership is beautiful too. Having someone there to pick you up when you need it and celebrate you, even when you might not. That's been a really special gift.
Yeah, and all that partnership, I sort of feel like sets the stage for the love part. Like it's kind of hard to feel all the lovey-love feelings when you're sort of pissed at some basic daily level. It's like, God, I know you've been Mr. Big Job, like whatever, but here I am and these are our people and this is, in the end, this will matter more to you. So like chop, chop, show up. I need you.
Yeah.
And when they do, I mean, I'm also married to a really nice guy who's devoted in ways that mean a lot to me. And for sure, he looks cuter to me on days when he's, been right there with Georgia or Claire during some moment of strife. And he's like being the frontline worker on something emotional and hard. And I think, I'm looking at him over dinner and thinking, you're really cute. And I don't think I could feel feel that way if he'd been pissing me off all day or like left all the hard stuff to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really fun to watch him being a dad.
Oh, yeah. That's the best. And 3 is great. They're 3?
They turned 3 this summer, yeah.
3's great. 4 was my favorite. 4 is just like the stuff they say and the connections they make. And I just got such a kick out of it. I was writing in my journal every day when they were 4, just trying to capture it because it felt so explosive to me, their growth and the kinds of new layers of understanding that they had about the world. I just was so wowed. It was a year of wonder, I felt. You have that to look forward to. But you have 2 at the same time. That feels hard to me.
It can be. When they're... it's hard when they're like... Our daughter is like getting into our bed at 3:00 every morning, and she is like a fish out of water. She's like flopping all over the place. I get like elbowed and kicked, and she like pushes me right to the edge of the bed. And then if I like, try to wiggle over, she'll be like, "You're in my space." How can you not laugh at that?
I know.
I'm so tired. Maybe I got like 3 hours of sleep last night. It was not great, but they're so funny.
They're so funny.
The things they say, the creative play that's coming out right now, the little adventures they take us on. They turn the house into a museum.
Fantastic.
And they take us around the museum, and they show us the couch.
Our kids used to turn our house into a hotel, and they would give us PowerPoint slides to welcome us to the hotel. And then they put like numbers on the doors.
Oh my gosh.
And they had learned all the words like the suite, the honeymoon suite. Yes. And we were a bed and breakfast, and they put on aprons, and it was phenomenal. I'm glad you got your dream. I'm so happy to talk to you and to revel in the repair that your whole life represents.
Thank you. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be here.
Here are my takeaways from my conversation with Chasten Buttigieg. Number 1, the fundamental worldview required for repair is that growth is always possible. Number 2, if we're really striving to reunite, we have to keep coming to the table in good faith. Number 3, it can be awfully helpful to put children in the center of the frame. Number 4, a delayed apology is one of the most beautiful notes in the human orchestra. Number 5, if there's even the smallest opportunity to put a little superglue on the tiniest of ruptures, do it. Number 6, all families want the same thing, to be loved and accepted for who they are. Thank you, Chasten Buttigieg, for being so open and for sharing this story with us and for your ongoing advocacy work. Thank you to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations for being such enthusiastic and generous supporters of our Rupture and Repair series, and for all the great work they do in the world for years and years now. Thanks also to the team at Kelly Corrigan Wonders, our tech